Donald Trump's tax returns. A man with perspective on this, plus what's coming up soon, which is an investigation of Dr. Anthony Fauci, is the great Brad Wenstrup, Dr. Brad Wenstrup, who completed 25 years of service as a colonel in the U.S. Army. And Brad Wenstrup, first of all, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Bill. Same to you and all your listeners.
It's been a great year in some ways, but in other ways it's been a terrible year. Before we talk about the issues, I have a sense, and I had this conversation with your friend and mine, Sean Hannity, about 2 nights ago, and that is this. Is the electorate different now than we thought it was? Everything in November looked to me as if it's going to be a whitewash. It's going to be a 25, 30-seat gain in the House. The Senate was going to be 53, 54. Your friend and mine, Newt Gingrich, said maybe as many as 56 seats in the Senate. All of a sudden, none of it happened. And we discussed the fact that maybe the American people have changed. The earth's moved under our feet, and things are different than we thought. Have you considered the possibility, you and the leadership of the House, coming in, Kevin McCarthy, I assume, Scalise and others, that somehow the world is not as normal people like you and I and Tony Bender picture the world? Is the world different?
Well, I think it probably is. I mean, I am proud that in the last 2 terms in the House of Representatives, we've worked very hard to get good candidates out there, and we have taken back the House of Representatives. Not by the margin we wanted, but we certainly have been able to do that. And that's obviously very key to the future of the country as we see what's taking place. I don't know. I feel like a lot of our youth have had themselves in some kind of re-education camp and being re-taught differently on what America is all about and what the rest of the world is really about and how we do live in the greatest democracy that's probably ever been put together by our founders. And we have now an educational system that often berates our founders, that looks back on every flaw we ever had, even if we've corrected those flaws. You know, we're somehow supposed to still feel guilty about it. And it's just a different world. And I don't think people understand economics. I don't think that they understand the civics of what has been in place. And I don't see necessarily that the next generation understands the damage that's being done to them. And I think that's one of my concerns. And a lot of people in this generation don't seem to care about the damage they're doing for the next generation.
Yeah, you know, the 2 issues that are intractable, that cannot be quickly changed, our southern border, letting in 5 to 10 million illegals, and all that entails, which is public education, which is emergency rooms, which is housing issues, and the other thing, which I think is equally or maybe more important, we've borrowed $32 trillion. Now we're talking about money, and every year it goes up another trillion, which brings me to my first substantive question. It appears that you Republicans, not necessarily you, have agreed to a $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill with earmarks out the wazoo. Most of the money is borrowed. How in the hell can a functioning Congress do that?
Well, they can't. And again, what we have now and in control are Democrats that are just pushing through all kinds of things. You can't believe some of the things that are in this bill coming up. And it's in addition to all the spending that's already taken place. You know, if we were realistic, we would be having a rainy day fund for the United States of America. But at the federal level, we just go, oh, we can just keep borrowing, and so that's been a problem. I'm looking at this bill, and I will admit that there are some things that I wanted to get in there and that are in there, but these are things that should have been taken individually, one at a time, and through appropriations, not all thrown into one big package at the end of the year. It's like you've piled up all the garbage in your house, and you only have one day of collection at the end of the year. And that's what we're doing, is putting it out, and so it looks like it's going to go through. And you know, but I could go down a list of things that will make your flesh crawl. That the federal government is paying for, you know, pride centers and museums, Michelle Obama Trail. I mean, it just goes on and on. Why is this something that all the American people are being asked to pay for? Or actually, not even Americans today, but our kids coming up later as they start to pay taxes.
It's awful. And you have those little kids. Isn't it great to be a dad, to be a mom? And I would encourage, I listen to your friend and mine, Josh Hawley, who makes a lot of sense to me, and that young men ought to quit watching porn, and young men ought to quit playing video games, go out and meet a real woman, treat her the right way, get married, and have children. But right now it's about porn and video games. There's 7 to 10 million young men between the ages of 18 and 45 that are doing nothing but watching porn and playing video games. You got me off on a rant right now. I'm telling you, it drives me crazy. But what the burdens we're placing upon those kids, when you open up your Christmas gifts on Sunday morning with children, understand that each child's going to owe about $200,000 in debt for the pride centers around the country, for Michelle Obama trails, all the crap put in the budget, and Nancy Pelosi is wined, dined, and pocket-lined all over the world with fluff pieces from 60 Minutes as if she's Nancy Pelosi of ARC. It drives me friggin' crazy. Can you smell what I'm cooking?
I absolutely can. And, when we pass bills, I just ask people, consider a simple test. Does this bill that we're about to pass, no matter what it is, does it make Americans more free? And will the next generation say thank you? Because that's what our founders had in mind. More freedom, more individual liberties, and a government that's owned and run by the people of the United States of America, not bigger than the people themselves. And that's what we've lost. And the next generation doesn't realize what's happening to them. And you can just go back to look at what the deficit was under, say, Kennedy, which was 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I mean, it's just like nothing, and we were appalled as it was going up. And even he, as a Democrat, was concerned about that.
Yeah.
But that's not the case today.
No.
And that's the battle that we've had, and we got to keep making the case. And, I look at it this way in the House of Representatives as we move forward into the next term. If advocating for being fiscally responsible and keeping our freedoms in this country, if that means I don't get elected again, so be it. That's fine, because you want to complete the mission the way it was intended to be completed. And the American people, in my opinion, are really being robbed left and right.
Congressman Brad Wenstrup, right now the biggest issue in the country is not the southern border, the freezing temperatures in South Texas. It is not, by the way, in the year 2001, not exactly the dark ages, the accumulated national debt was $4 trillion. Here we are 21 years later, and it's 38 times in the last 20 years, and it's accelerating toward a brick wall. But the biggest issue in the country is Donald Trump's tax returns or the January 6th committee hearings, and whether or not the U.S. attorney is going to actually file criminal charges, which everyone in Washington says they are. It's going to happen. The media is going nuts. Can you make the case as to why at this point, 2 years out of office, that all of us have to embarrass Donald Trump through his tax returns? How come that's such a big issue now?
What is it about Donald Trump that has people shaking in their boots? I even look at when you had people like George Stephanopoulos, they'd have a Republican on and he'd say, will you admit that the election was fair? Do you admit that Joe Biden won? Come on, admit it. I only have an undergraduate degree in psychology, but that tells me that you don't think he did because you want some codification from some others. They're just obsessed with Donald Trump, and it's almost like a frenzy to me. And, we went through this yesterday with Ways and Means Committee, and, it was very clear. If you look back on statements made by Democrats on that committee, when you go back to 2017, all they talked about was, we want Donald Trump's taxes. We want Donald Trump's taxes. And now they hit it under the idea that we're reviewing the presidential audit program. So what that means is all presidents are audited. Okay, we're fine with that. Both sides of the aisle are fine with that. Okay, but they're using that to say, and to really evaluate how that program is working, we need to see Donald Trump's taxes. And I made the case, if you're really interested in the audit, you never mentioned it when you started screaming about wanting his taxes. Nancy Pelosi screamed about it too. Nobody mentioned looking at the audit program. And if you're really interested in the program, why do you want to only look at one president's taxes? Why don't you want to look at all president's taxes? And that doesn't look at the program. None of that addresses the program they claim to be wanting to have oversight over.
I'd like to look at Hillary Clinton's taxes after the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Initiative. I want to see how Hillary Clinton left office and as Secretary of State and First Lady, having no money at all. Now she's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I'd like to look at Nancy Pelosi's taxes. How come she's worth hundreds of millions of dollars and she's been a dedicated public servant for 49 years? How about looking at their taxes, Congressman? Does that make sense?
I'd have no problem if they wanted to look at the taxes of anybody leaving office, to be honest with you. You can take a look at mine and compare it to when I was a practicing physician, and it's far different, but I don't know how some of these people walk away with so much money.
It drives me nuts. One last thing. Dr. Anthony Fauci. I had on a couple of expert guests in medical issues. You're one of them. And Florida's about to convene a grand jury to look at possible criminal charges against Dr. Anthony Fauci for fraud. Are you on board or not?
I think there's so many things we have to look at with Dr. Fauci. I mean, I just think of the things he said, and as a physician, as a doctor, as a scientist, you look at him, telling people that you have to wear a mask, that it makes a difference. Where's your scientific evidence? Then he comes out and says, oh, very, very definitively, this virus came from the wet market. No evidence whatsoever. That's appalling. You could never submit that. Previously, you could never submit something like that as a journal article, because it's like there's nothing here. But this is where we are. But I'm leading the investigation in the House on the origins of COVID.
Yes.
And so certainly he is one of the first people we want to talk to, but also Ralph Barrick. And let me tell you who Ralph Barrick is. He's an American scientist out in North Carolina, and he was doing the work with the Chinese, Dr. Xi and Li, to create a chimera. They came out with this in 2015. The technology to create a super virus has been there, and he was one of the leaders on it. You're going to have to explain why you think this is a good idea, because let me tell you, there's no commercial use for creating a virus that's super infectious to people. Right?
And according to the stats, about the COVID-19 is 0.3% fatal. 0.3, which for those mathematically challenged who didn't go to Deer Park High School, that's about 1/3 of 1%. Right now, our government's creating viruses that are 75% fatal. Now, if those things get out, all bets are off. We're all dead.
So we need to look at exactly how this money was transferred from Anthony Fauci, if you will, and the NIH, Francis Collins, to places like EcoHealth Alliance, to universities, which also took some of their grant money and gave it to the China Wuhan Institute of Virology. And all of these, just follow the money on a lot of this stuff and try to understand why. Why were we doing this? I don't know the answer to that. We need to get into that. And it's very evident if you look at so many of the things the State Department has even come out and said, going back to 2005, that China is trying to develop offensive bioweapons.
Yeah.
They also pointed out just even last year that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was associated with the Fifth Institute, which is part of the Academy of Military Medical Science in China. They were publishing articles together. The Fifth Institute is what focuses on coronaviruses and bioweapons. So we're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. We're following the breadcrumbs. It's pretty obvious in many ways to what was going on. We got to get it exposed. And the problem we face today with all the misinformation that our government seems to control is getting the American people to understand what truly happened. Because if you can't put it out on social media and mainstream media and let America know what actually took place, we got a problem. And Twitter's revealing a lot of that problem.
Offensive bioweapons created by Chinese communists, and it's scary as can be. We have about 30 seconds remaining, Congressman. You're like a normal guy. You've been there about 10 years, but you're kind of still normal. Are we in trouble?
Yeah, we are. We are in trouble in a lot of ways. You have to face that reality. Look, I work with a lot of good people, and some of them are even from the other side of the aisle. But if you're being led down a wrong path, it's a wrong path. America has always had its ups and downs, and we've always tried to mend our every flaw, but we got a lot of flaws to try and mend today. And some of that has to do with the attitude. And people have to understand this is the greatest country that ever existed. Freedom is important, and we can continue to shine. I hope people take that into consideration. You know, I want to say one thing that Pope John Paul II said when he came to the United States in 1998. He said, freedom consists not in doing what you will, but having the right to do what you ought. And that's what people, especially people in government, need to keep in mind.
When I look at the vote that was taken in November, that was shocking to me. When I look at the leadership of the House and the Senate, look at Schumer and Pelosi. When I look at Biden and Kamala Harris, gosh, I think we're in trouble. But nonetheless, change is coming. And Congressman Brad Wenstrup, may you and yours have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you, Bill. Same to you.